The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. The first portfolio is Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. Question number 1, I call George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government regarding the potential impact on parliamentary business, what its position is on whether a far-right political parties in the UK could cause issues in relationship between Scottish and UK parliaments and could result in the diminution of the Scottish Parliament.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
And a very happy New Year to you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is committed to forging and maintaining good relationships with governments and parliaments across the United Kingdom, as well as defending and enhancing the current devolution settlement. Any attempts to undermine devolution or to damage relationships between our parliaments should be resisted robustly.
Georgia.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that decisions about Scotland should be taken by the people elected here, accountable to the people of Scotland, and not by parties based elsewhere that have little understanding of our communities and no real stake in Scotland's future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the public should be very concerned about all political extremists who oppose Scottish self-government, who seek to undermine community cohesion and want to privatise the National Health Service. It's important that no matter the outcome of the Scottish Parliament elections, democracy is respected, and this means defending any attempts to undermine devolution and the powers of the Scottish Parliament.
Question 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether regional news serves an important function in a democracy.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government strongly believes that regional news is essential to healthy democracy, and we value its role in providing scrutiny of local institutions, giving voice to underrepresented communities and ensuring that important civic information reaches those who need it most. That's why we support the creation of the Scottish Public Interest Journalism Working Group to strengthen local journalism, and why we continue to consistently stress the importance of sustaining high-quality, locally relevant news in our engagement with broadcasters, Ofcom and other stakeholders. We remain committed to ensuring that Scotland's media landscape is robust, is sustainable and is representative of all communities across Scotland.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? That STV has stepped back from a wholesale axing of its separate Northern Scotland news programme is to be welcome. But the STV Group's latest accounts reveal that it made over £20 million in profit, and that for the 6th year running, STV News at 6 is the most watched news programme in Scotland. In a recent survey, 83% of the public opposed the proposals. The unions opposed the proposals, which would see 60 workers made redundant, some of them compulsorily. And that is why the National Union of Journalists is taking industrial action at STV today. So will the Cabinet Secretary join with me in backing the NUJ strike action and in calling on the board of STV to listen to their viewers, listen to their unions, meet their public service obligation and withdraw these proposals altogether?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, and I think it would be appropriate at this stage to acknowledge that I am by profession a journalist and have been a long-standing member of the National Union of Journalists. While I recognise that Scottish Television, through engagement with Ofcom and as a result of the concerns raised by stakeholders, has now reconsidered some of their proposed changes, the Scottish Government remains concerned that there would be a negative impact on news provision across Scotland if these plans go ahead. I've met with Scottish Television, I've met with Ofcom, I've met with the National Union of Journalists in relation to this issue, and the Scottish Government will continue to champion a strong and sustainable Scottish broadcasting sector and continue to urge, including through the current Ofcom consultation, against any decisions that would result in further reductions in news reporting in Scotland or redundancies of Scottish-based staff.
Brief supplementaries. First, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the network of local democracy reporters who are funded by the BBC through the licence fee, who provide a very valuable service across the country, reporting, for example, on local council meetings and activities which otherwise would not be brought to public attention. In any engagement the Cabinet Secretary has with the BBC in terms of charter renewal, will he reinforce to the BBC the importance of this network and ensure that this continues after any charter renewal?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Murdo Fraser's question is very timely because of the BBC Charter renewal process, which he raised in his question as well. And as I will give him an undertaking that through this process that I will reflect on the point that he's making, in particular about the support for local reporting, which performs a valuable service, particularly in communities and in relation to the covering of local government democracy. So I'll happily give him an undertaking that I'll keep him apprised of that. The Scottish Government is involved in relation to BBC Charter renewal, and I will definitely bear the points in mind that he's raised today.
Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. I send my solidarity to all the STV workers on strike today. I hope those on the picket line in the snow in Aberdeen have managed to keep warm. STV's failure to rule out compulsory redundancies has provoked today's strike action. Its plans will reduce broadcasting of local news. The current major weather incident in the North East highlights the need for local information that serves local communities in ways that national coverage just can't. And that's just one of the obvious impacts on local communities. How does this affect democracy in the North East, particularly in the age of disinformation? And can the Cabinet Secretary say what more the government can do to support quality journalism across Scotland, not just national coverage?
We are going to need briefer questions. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I've already raised our support for the creation of the Scottish Public Interest Journalism Working Group, which I think covers the point in general that Maggie Chapman was raising. But in relation to STV and the very timely recognition of the regional impact of developments, and that's clearly an issue in the North East at the moment with the weather situation there, underlines how important it is that we have public service journalism covering situations like that. I can give her an assurance that the Scottish Government is continuing to meet with Ofcom regarding a range of broadcasting matters, and that includes STV's proposals for regional news provision. I wrote to Ofcom regarding this matter. I have met with the Chief Executive to raise the Scottish Government's concerns, and I've urged the regulator to ensure that regional representation and news coverage is safeguarded and the public service broadcaster service commitments to invest in news to help tackle misinformation, which she also raised, are upheld.
Okay, I'm going to make the same plea for answers now too. Question 3, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of initiatives used by other nations to support artists and creatives.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government develops approaches to supporting culture based on evidence of impact, including learning from other countries. A comprehensive evidence-based review of the structures surrounding culture funding is already underway here, including analysis of the recommendations from both the Independent Creative Scotland Review and the Culture Fair Work Task Force. In addition, as an example of lessons learned, the Scottish Government recognised the value that multi-year funding delivers for artists and creatives, reflected in more than half of those 251 organisations funded through multi-year funding this financial year receiving stability for the first time.
Evelyn Tweed.
A pilot scheme in Ireland providing a basic income to artists and creatives has seen great success and has now been made permanent. Every €1 invested in the pilot generated €1.39 in social value. What learning can the government take from the success of schemes like this?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Irish Basic Income for the Arts pilot demonstrates just one approach across a range of possible approaches to support our creative producers. And I spoke about this with my Irish Culture Minister colleague when he attended an event with me at the Edinburgh International Book Festival last year. Undoubtedly, the Irish scheme has provided benefit to those 2,000 individuals receiving support, but it's not without its challenges in terms of the number of beneficiaries, the number of unsuccessful applicants and the relative sectoral impact. A final point is that not all of the policy levers and powers open to the Irish Government in moving forward with this policy are currently available to the Scottish Government, specifically on tax, social welfare and addressing precarity in the workforce. But I give Evelyn Tweed a commitment that I am looking very closely at the scheme and if there are learnings for Scotland.
Question 4, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Constitution Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding the potential implications for Scotland's relations with EU member states of the UK rejoining the Erasmus programme.
Cabinet Secretary.
Rejoining Erasmus Plus is essential. The Scottish Government consistently demanded this since Scotland was recklessly removed from the programme under the UK Government's disastrous Brexit. We welcome The current UK Government agreeing that staying in Erasmus Plus was always the right choice and will now work with partners to maximise the benefits and take-up of the scheme. However, every step rebuilding EU relations reminds us what was lost through Brexit and cannot be regained under the UK Government's current negotiation process. Therefore, Scotland's future is in Europe as a full European Union member state.
Annabel Ewing.
Secretary for his answer and, of course, share his concluding remarks he has just made there. However, he will be aware of my particular interest in the Erasmus scheme, given that my late mother, Winnie Ewing, was a key architect and proponent of the Erasmus scheme when she chaired the European Parliament's Education, Culture and Sport Committee. Rejoining the scheme is, of course, great news for young people in Scotland and across Europe, and it would be helpful to know, therefore, what discussions the various Scottish Government offices intend to have with their EU counterparts in the relevant member states to ensure that Scotland hits the ground running and maximises the potential that Erasmus offers.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, may I join Annabel Ewing in paying tribute to Winnie Ewing for her role in relation to the Erasmus scheme. Scottish Government offices in Brussels and European Union member states will be using their and our extensive network of contacts, both formal and informal, across the European Union to make sure that Scotland's interest and engagement in the Erasmus Plus programme is firmly registered. Scotland participated over-proportionately in the Erasmus programme at the time of our last involvement. We will also be working with our higher and further education sectors here in Scotland, as well as with youth schools and others within the ambit of the programme in Scotland to encourage maximum participation.
Brief supplementary, Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. Given Gavin Donoghue, Chief Executive of Colleges Scotland's statement, it is very welcome that Erasmus Students' Exchange Programme will be returning in 2027, echoed today by the Cabinet Secretary. But is the Cabinet Secretary personally disappointed that the SNP Scottish Government could not fill the gap as they'd promised to do, unlike in Wales?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we looked very closely at the Welsh scheme and came to the conclusion there was no substitute for Erasmus, and that's why we've pushed so hard for the Erasmus scheme to be reintroduced. But it might be of interest to him and other members to just share a little bit of information which I think is relevant, that the United Kingdom Government have said that the UK and EU did not agree at the summit or as part of this deal to home fee status for EU students. That would have been detrimental to students at Scottish universities. Students participating in the Erasmus Plus placements are exempt from tuition and registration fees at their host institutions, but they may still be required to pay fees at their home institution. I think it's important to understand that, but I think it should be clear to everybody to understand there is no substitute for the Erasmus Plus scheme. That's now been acknowledged by his colleagues in the UK Government, and we can be agreed on the point that that is the best way forward for students in Scotland and European students wanting to come to institutions here.
I can just advise the Chamber from to get the other supplementaries in for later questions. They will need to be briefer, as indeed will the responses. Question 5, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it has taken since the publication of the independent review into Creative Scotland to implement its recommendations.
Cabinet Secretary.
Since the publication of the review on the 25th of November, I've been considering its recommendations alongside the recommendations of other related reports, and whilst the majority of the recommendations are for Creative Scotland, some are for others, including the Scottish Government. All require partnership working to be taken forward. As we continue to deliver our commitment to increase culture funding by £100 million per year, it remains vital that public sector partners do so as effectively as possible, and the recommendations of this review will be key to that, and I'll update Parliament on progress in due course.
Sarah Boyack.
The Cabinet Secretary for his response. The review recommends that Creative Scotland should reassess its internal structure to ensure its 4 statutory roles are effectively delivered. So does the Cabinet Secretary intend to carry out such reviews on a regular basis to prevent a repeat of the issues identified in the review of Historic Environment Scotland's internal structure?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think in fairness, I'm sure Sarah Boyack would acknowledge, the review into Creative Scotland has literally only just a few weeks ago reported its findings. So I'm sure she will understand that we want to consider all of those recommendations, and I would encourage people like her, who has a long track record and interest in culture and the arts, to be part of that process and feed in her thoughts. I think we need to keep arrangements for public sector bodies under continuous review, and she is aware that reviews are being undertaken in relation to Historic Environment Scotland. But specifically in relation to the question that's been posed today, I'd look forward to any views that she might have, because we are considering all options that flow from the Creative Scotland review.
Briefly, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The independent review found Creative Scotland to be over-bureaucratic, warned of a lack of transparency surrounding funding decisions using public funds, and highlighted poor leadership. Therefore, how will the Cabinet Secretary ensure that the implementation of the recommendations delivers the meaningful reforms that is so desperately needed and required?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, I think, firstly, I would like to wish Alexander Stewart a Happy New Year, but take the opportunity to say that I know that the interest in the culture and arts sector is a non-political party political issue. I look to colleagues who are very committed to the sector, and I know that any changes that we will seek to implement as a Scottish Government, or indeed Creative Scotland will, and they have a lot of recommendations, will be subject to parliamentary inquiry. It will go before committee. I will be asked questions. We're not yet at the stage of adopting the recommendations, delivering on the recommendations, but I know that he and other colleagues will look closely at how those are delivered by Creative Scotland and indeed the Scottish Government, and I'll be happy to answer questions when we get to that stage.
Very briefly, Neil Bibby.
The Cabinet Secretary has talked about the need for partnership working, and he's stated that he's open to suggestions. Can I therefore ask him what consideration he has given to creating an advisory board or a task force aimed at considering the recommendations and their implementation to ensure they have the maximum amount of confidence from across the sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'd be grateful if he can send me any suggestions that he has. He knows that Creative Scotland already has a board. And he is aware that the Scottish Government has a sponsorship team that works with Creative Scotland. But I do take on board the point that he makes about wanting to have maximum assurance. I appreciate the point that he's making. If he has any specifics about how such a mechanism might work, I will look at it with an open mind. It's in the Government's interest, it's in parliamentarians' interest that Creative Scotland is able to deliver on the recommendations that were made to them, and we will be working jointly and severally to make sure that that is delivered.
Question 6, Tim Eagle.
To ask the Scottish Government regarding its work to support the historic environment, whether it will provide an update on its involvement in the regeneration of Grant Lodge in Elgin.
The Scottish Government provides support for our historic environment through sponsorship of Historic Environment Scotland. Regarding Grant Lodge regeneration, Historic Environment Scotland have been engaged on this work, including funding and planning inquiries. Regeneration of Grant Lodge forms a key pillar of the Murray Growth Deal's Cultural Quarter project, which will receive £16 million of investment, of which £12.84 million is Scottish Government funding and £4.06 million UK Government funding. The Cultural Quarter full business case was endorsed by both governments in 2024, and Murray Council recently submitted a planning application regarding Grant Lodge, marking a significant milestone in delivery of that project.
Tim Eagle.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary will know very well Grant Lodge in Elgin and its importance to the local community, and it was great to see at the end of the last year Murray Council submit its final proposals. But working with historic sites is never easy. So can the Cabinet Secretary give some assurances that the Scottish Government and its agencies are supportive in finding solutions should any issues arise as this very important project for the local community develops?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'd be perfectly content to give Tim Eagle that assurance. I think he knows, as a former Member of Parliament from Murray, I was involved with the project at the earliest of stages when the potential future for Grant Lodge was being discussed. So he knows that I know that he knows that I know that this is a very important project, and I can give him the assurance that should there be areas where the Scottish Government can avail itself of potential solutions, should there be reasons for that, I would be happy to take a close look at that.
Question 7, Michelle Thompson.
to ask the Scottish Government regarding its provision of funding for humanitarian aid, what representations is made to the UK Government in relation to humanitarian issues arising in Ukraine as a result of landmines and other explosive threats?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government resolutely condemns Russia's illegal war against Ukraine, as we have done since its invasion. We recognise the devastating impact that landmines have, killing and maiming thousands each year. Indiscriminate and unpredictable, their presence drives whole communities from their homes and land. And the Scottish Government regularly discusses issues arising from the ongoing war in Ukraine with the UK Government and civil servants engaged with their counterparts within the FCDO on this matter.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and I'd also like to thank Savannah McCrum from Stirling University, whose recent research has revealed the critical role local women are playing in Ukraine in terms of undertaking the likes of active demining efforts, frontline volunteering and providing humanitarian support in communities. The research has also revealed the role women are playing in capacity building and community resilience, with 50% of new businesses being founded by women. Will the Cabinet Secretary raise the need to ensure support for the women of Ukraine in all their efforts when he next meets his UK Government counterpart? And might he consider how Scotland could partner with Ukraine to support female entrepreneurship?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm very content to look at the suggestions that Michelle Thompson makes, but also let her know, in case she didn't, that as part of our support for Ukraine, the Scottish Government has provided £300,000 for the Scottish headquartered HALO Trust for Mine Clearance, Risk Education and the training of deminers, with a focus on employing women to help make communities safe. The Scottish Government will continue to advocate for support for Ukrainian women and to contribute to Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction, including through the UK-Ukraine 100-year partnership and initiatives such as the John Smith Trust's Ukraine Women Leadership Programme.
In question 8, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government how its £600,000 contribution in humanitarian aid to the occupied Palestinian Territory Humanitarian Fund will support civilians and demonstrate Scotland's commitment to international solidarity and human rights.
Cabinet Secretary.
At this crucial time, Scottish Government funding will support the scaling up of the humanitarian response in Gaza. The UNOCHA Fund helps to coordinate the humanitarian response by international and national organisations to those in the affected areas. The funding will support the delivery of life-saving health services, of food and nutrition assistance, of emergency shelter, of water and sanitation, of protection services, of education support and cash for families. And the Scottish Government takes its responsibilities as a global citizen seriously, and we continue to respond within our powers to provide assistance to those most in need.
James Dornan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. And could the Cabinet Secretary maybe say what more he thinks the Scottish Government can do to support humanitarian efforts and alleviate the suffering of civilians in the occupied Palestinian territories?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the Scottish Government's £600,000 contribution to UNOCHA formed part of a wider package of measures announced by the First Minister on the 3rd of September 2025 in response to the crisis in Gaza, and this included a further £400,000 grant to Kids Operating Room to establish the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub, a scale replica of a rapidly deployable field hospital, and these commitments bring the Scottish Government's total humanitarian aid for the Gaza crisis and wider Middle East to £2.3 million.
And briefly, Stephen Kerr.
Isn't it more factually correct to say that the Cabinet Secretary can't say exactly how the £600,000 was spent because it went into a greater fund? That would be more factually correct. But can he confirm that none of the funding from that fund will pass through organisations or intermediaries over which Hamas has influence or control? And can he explain how that assurance is verified in practice?
Cabinet Secretary.
These questions, because it's not the first time that he and colleagues have raised them, are a subject that are part of my considerations when we want to make sure that there is assurance around the delivery of humanitarian support here and in other projects around the world. I am assured by the advice that I have received, if Mr Kerr requires additional assurance, I'd be grateful if he could write to me on the subject. I have a high degree of trust in the United Nations, and I hope that he does too. And I think providing humanitarian support through the United Nations and its agencies is the right thing to do. But if he has any specific concerns, if he would share them with me, and I will make sure that I can reply to him in greater detail.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next portfolio to allow front benches to change. And the next portfolio is Justice and Home Affairs. Just the usual plea for members looking to ask for a supplementary for those questions to be as brief as possible. Likewise, the responses. Call question number 1, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government what work it is undertaking to ensure that rural and island communities have access to legal aid.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring access to legal aid in rural and island communities. While private solicitors cannot be compelled to undertake legal aid work, we continue to invest in the system to ensure availability. Funding is available to allow solicitors to travel to rural and remote parts of the country to carry out work, ensuring that individuals do not have to rely on local provision alone when seeking publicly funded legal assistance. Through our ongoing reform programme, we are considering targeted interventions, including grant funding and capacity building initiatives to strengthen access to legal aid where it is needed most.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Minister for that response and welcome the Scottish Government's work with the Scottish Legal Aid Board and others on these issues. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, can I ask the Minister, if the Scottish Government could say what more can be done to assist in attracting trainee solicitors to our islands to practice law and improve access to rural legal aid, and what they will be able to do in their next conversations with the SLAB and LSS on these issues?
Minister.
Thank you. Scotland's universities are rightly regarded as world-leading in educating solicitors and legal professionals. The Scottish Government recognises the need to ensure that talent is deployed across all parts of the country, including rural and island communities where access to legal aid can be challenging. I am willing to consider all further measures with stakeholders, including trainees themselves, to find out what more can be done to attract trainees and newly qualified solicitors to rural Scotland and improve access to justice. Furthermore, there are several ways in which access to solicitors can be facilitated remotely, and funding is available to allow solicitors to travel to rural and remote parts of the country to carry out work, meaning that individuals do not have to rely on local provision alone when seeking publicly funded legal assistance.
And briefly, Liam Kerr.
In 2024, UN human rights monitors warned that low fees and poor retention were hollowing out Scotland's legal aid system. Faced with that warning, the government promised a legal aid reform bill and promptly abandoned it. And rather than addressing the fees issue, the Minister falls back on just 20 traineeships starting next year. Can the Minister provide the data that shows that 20 new nationwide traineeships will arrest the workforce collapse in Scotland's legal aid representation, particularly in rural and island communities?
Minister.
Firstly, negotiations are ongoing with the legal profession regarding an uplift. There have been 2 offers that have been rejected, and I'm hoping that we will be able to come to a conclusion shortly, but it is due to the budget next week as well. That makes sure what we're doing with the traineeships, for example. I know there were 40. We are looking at 20 initially. We're also looking at other initiatives that could be included moving forward that are not in the public domain yet, that are being negotiated with the Law Society. So I will keep Parliament updated.
Question 2, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what discussions it's had with the UK Government in relation to Crown immunity and the Scottish Prison Service.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constantine.
Presiding Officer, as Crown immunity is entirely a reserved matter, any legislative change requires action by the UK Government, which is why I have raised the issue with the UK Government on several occasions over recent years. Most recently, I raised the matter directly with the former Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Justice when we met in the summer, and I wrote to Stephen Timms, the UK Minister with responsibility for this area, in November 2025 to request further engagement. Following that, we are now making arrangements to discuss in more detail, and I hope that that will take place in the near future.
Colin Beattie.
As transparency and accountability are essential components of our justice system, what assessment has been made of how the removal of corporate Crown immunity from the Scottish Prison Service would ensure that these values are upheld and lessons can be learned?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, transparency, accountability and learning are essential, particularly following a death in custody. While the Scottish Government itself cannot remove Crown immunity, we recognise the arguments that reform could strengthen accountability and support learning and prevention. Any reform would require UKG action, and in that context, Scottish ministers have agreed in principle to the UK Government's Public Office Accountability Bill, which aims to strengthen accountability across public bodies. In parallel, we are progressing with reforms to strengthen oversight, scrutiny and learning across the prison estate, including work to establish a national oversight mechanism so that improvements to accountability and safety do not wait on legislative change.
Question 3, Miles Briggs.
Deputy Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Justice Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding any plans to deliver campus police officers across all schools in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the safety of our children, young people and staff at school is of course paramount, and the use of funding of campus-based officers is a matter for local authorities. Through the Relationships and Behaviour in Schools National Action Plan, the Scottish Government works with local authorities and partners to support positive relationships and behaviour and to promote safe, inclusive learning environments for all children and young people. Action is also being taken forward through the Violence Prevention Framework for Scotland, backed by £6 million since 2023. This supports delivery of a range of targeted prevention and early intervention activities working in schools, hospitals and across communities.
Miles Briggs.
Campus cops is incredibly important, and evidence shows that long-term benefits from police being connected to schools to help reduce antisocial behaviour and indeed increase action around increasing levels of violence, which we are seeing in our schools. Now, it is concerning we've seen a reduction of over 1,000 police officers since the pandemic, but I think it's also concerning that local authorities across the country are looking to take decisions to potentially not fund school-link officers. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if the Scottish Government want to see a national commitment to all schools to have access to school-link officers? And what is the Scottish Government's position on this? Or is it just being left to local authorities?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Presiding Officer, can I say to Mr Briggs that I have seen for myself in my own constituency in years gone by the impact that police officers attached to schools can make. The arguments are very similar in terms of the value of having good community policing. In terms of the Scottish Government, the importance of community policing is recognised in our strategic policing priorities, and Police Scotland's three-year business plan includes a number of measures aimed at enhancing community policing. As I said, in terms of the specific issue about officers attached to schools, that is a matter for local authorities, and as well as increasing the police budget on this financial year, the resources available to local government across the country also increased by over £1 billion.
A couple of brief supplementaries first. Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, every pupil and member of staff, of course, deserves to feel safe in Scotland's schools. Can I ask how the Scottish Government is working with the third sector, as well as with teachers and young people, to reduce the risk of young people engaging in violent behaviour?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, of course, all young people and staff should feel safe in our schools, and our third sector plays an important and crucial role in supporting schools and wider communities around youth violence. In my original answer, I already noted our investment in the violence prevention framework. This includes Medics Against Violence work with young people in schools and youth clubs on the consequences of knife carrying. The Scottish Violence Reduction Unit work with police school liaison officers and on training teachers, and Youth Link Scotland deliver the national No Knives Better Lives programme, and that of course is in addition to the Cashback for Communities initiative.
And briefly, Katie Clark.
Violence, sexism and misogyny are on the rise in schools across the UK, which is why the UK Government announced plans for specialist training courses, both for teachers and for pupils who are classified as high risk, including issues such as consent. Will the Scottish Government, working with key stakeholders such as Police Scotland and the education sector unions, bring forward a cross-campus strategy to tackle violence, sexism and misogyny in our schools, including looking at the specialist training approach set out by the UK Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware of the new strategy that has been pursued by the UK Government through the cross-government engagement that I have with Justice colleagues. It is important to put on record the work that already takes place in Scotland's schools around, in particular, consent, and there are many of our schools that work with the third sector, including Rape Crisis Scotland, around the equally safe work. It may also be of interest to the member that Police Scotland have a new strategy in terms of violence against women and girls, and since 2023 their response to tackling violence against women and girls has been driven by the VOG strategy and captured within their VOG implementation plan, reporting quarterly on 86 actions which were based upon a variety of commitments. It is the point that the member makes is important about it being cross-government, cross-portfolio, cross-sector, and I'm happy to engage with her further on that.
Question 4, Sue Webber.
Sir, to ask the Scottish Government how many victims were notified in 2025 of the early release of an offender under any early release or temporary release scheme.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in response to the implementation of the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Act 2025 and the Early Release of Prisoners Scotland Regulations 2025 legislation, Scottish Prison Service Victim Notification Scheme have notified 35 registered victims of a change of release date of a person in custody. This figure represents 100% of registered victims where the offender's release date changed as a direct result of the implementation of the above legislation.
Sue Webber.
Cabinet Secretary, we believe victims should know if their assailants won't be completing their full sentence and will be at large in communities. And we've been told that only 2% of victims were notified of their offender's early release under the last emergency release scheme. And that's frankly appalling. The figures that were responded in my answer regarding 100% registered on the victim notification scheme is the sum total of all, but hardly any victims have registered to that victim notification scheme, and Victim Support Scotland have raised concerns about delays in reforming that. Can the Cabinet Secretary guarantee that the majority of victims will actually be notified in advance this time, not just those on the VNS scheme?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Presiding Officer, in relation to any temporary process that involves the earlier release of prisoners, there is a process that is being utilised, which is in operation to enable victims who have not registered on the VNS to inquire whether they could be provided with the release date of an offender in relation to their case. Other parts of the legislation that bolster this is that victims can also get support and access, get help to access information via Victim Support Scotland, Assist Children's First and Rape Crisis Scotland.
Question 5, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by apologising to you and the Chamber for my late arrival into the Chamber. Despite the fact I've been here for 10 years with a start time of 2:25 I had it at 35 minutes past 2. I promise to do better next term. Can I ask the Scottish Government whether it has made any assessment of recent prison inspections findings on the use of restricted regimes and their impact on prisoners' welfare and safety?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Prison Service welcome all reports by HMIPS and understand that they provide an opportunity to learn, improve and consolidate practices within our prisons. Whilst there has not been any formal assessment on regime restriction, the Scottish Government and SPS recognise the impact that any restriction on regime can have on those in custody, and that is why SPS only apply regime restrictions when necessary and only to support a safe and secure environment for staff and those that they care for. SPS ensures that when there is a need for regime restrictions, they do not in any way limit family contact, whether it be via in-person visits or via contact with family or friends using in-cell telephones. In all instances, restrictions are compliant with the Prison and Young Offenders Rules Scotland 2011.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? In written answers to Parliament, the Scottish Prison Service has admitted it does not routinely record when restrictive regimes are imposed or on how long they last. Keeping prisoners isolated and not knowing the impact hardly screams rehabilitation. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that this represents a serious failure of basic oversight and that ministers are currently making policy in the dark in some of the most restrictive conditions in Scottish prisons?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, I don't accept that, Presiding Officer, although I do accept that there is improvements that can and should be made, particularly in light of the HMIPS recent report. It does have to be recognised that when there are restrictions to the regime in any of our establishments, that they are often done reactively at very short notice as opposed to necessarily in a planned way. And that's part of the job of SPS to manage situations and to care for prisoners and to ensure safety of staff and prisoners in our establishments. But it is a matter that I will give further thought in my discussions with the Chief Executive.
Briefly, Pauline McNeill.
I refer to the letter issued by the Scottish Prison Service last July called the Focus Day, which I believe is the name for the restrictive regime that's been mentioned in the question by Brian Whittle, a serious casualty of overcrowding. I just wonder if the Cabinet Secretary said she'll give further consideration to the capturing of data, that she should consider that it could be very important, given we have obligations to people that we hold in our prisons to let them out, to have activities of rehabilitation. So I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary has discussed with the Scottish Prison Service when they plan to end this regime so we can fulfil these obligations.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think it's important not to confuse or conflate restricted regimes. Regimes can be restricted in accordance with prison rules for a number of reasons. That is a different matter than a focused day that had been discussed with establishments and with the Prison Officers Association. In terms of the focused day, that issue has moved on, and what has been agreed is that each establishment must now consider adjustments to regimes and rosters at a local level aligned to local needs. And if the member wishes any further information, I would be happy to engage with her on that.
Question 6, Emma Harper.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to improve family support services within the prison estate.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Prison Service recognise the deep and positive impact a strong family connection and support network can have on emotional well-being. Introduced in 2024, the SPS Family and Parenting strategy promotes a healthy family relationship whilst recognising the complex and diverse nature of the family dynamic. Built on the principles such as respect, dignity and inclusion, the strategy aligns and complements other key SPS strategies and policies such as the the corporate parenting plan, mother and baby policy and vision for young people in custody. And this is in addition to the family contact officers who work and support family contact in establishments.
Emma Harper.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that HMP Dumfries is the latest facility of the prison estate to benefit from the Early Years Scotland and funding it has received from the Scottish Government to bring their groundbreaking family support service to the south. Given the huge importance of maintaining family contact in improving rehabilitation rates and reducing reoffending, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that initiatives like that at HMP Dumfries more than pay for themselves in stopping the revolving door of incarceration, which can be so, unfortunately, be the case?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, family and strong societal relationships are of course a known factor in enabling successful return back from custody to families and communities. Prison visitor centres provide vital support to families affected by imprisonment, and I've been really pleased to hear of the positive impact Early Years Scotland has been making at HMP Dumfries. We do remain committed to providing funding for visitor centres to provide a range of practical and emotional help for families affected by imprisonment, and the cross-portfolio approach taken to funding prison visitor centres reflects the impacts across health, justice and family wellbeing and supports our vision for justice.
Very briefly, Sharon Dowie.
Officer. Evidence to the Justice Committee shows that drug misuse in prisons disrupts family visits and support services. The Serious Organised Crime Task Force has noted concerns from the Council of Europe's Anti-Torture Committee about drugs and their impact on staff and inmates in Scotland's prisons. Many families do not believe the situation is improving. With that in mind, will the Cabinet Secretary consider publishing those findings in full?
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, you have to forgive me, Ms Dowie is so softly spoken I didn't grasp all of the question, but the point that she is making about the impact of drugs on families, communities and prisons is not one that should be considered in isolation, and I will look at the information that she has requested, and we've certainly been engaging with that organisation and gave a full response in terms of that independent inquiry.
Thank you. Question 7, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it anticipates the abolition of a not proven verdict will improve victims' experiences of the justice system.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as part of the landmark Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Act, not proven has been abolished for all new trials from 1st of January, effectively therefore taking effect from Monday this week. Not proven verdicts have caused pain and distress for many victims and their families, denying them clarity or closure and undermining their confidence in our system's ability to deliver justice. They have also left stigma hanging over the accused. I anticipate that this change will create fairer, more transparent decision-making with clear outcomes, crucial for a modern, effective and person-centred justice system that victims can trust.
David Torrance.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The reform of our justice system has long been campaigned for by victims, families and support organisations. How does this change also ensure clearer, fairer decision-making whilst protecting the rights of the accused?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am very grateful to the victims' families and support organisations who have campaigned tirelessly for this historic change and who have expressed relief that others will not have to experience the pain and anguish caused by the not proven verdict. Not proven is widely misunderstood, has no statutory definition, and such a verdict risks undermining public confidence, while the two opposing verdicts of guilty and not guilty are unambiguous and clear. However, the evidence tells us that we cannot abolish the not proven verdict in isolation without impacting the existing balance of fairness within the system. That is why we have also moved from requiring a simple majority for a conviction to requiring a two-thirds majority, and I believe this strikes the right balance.
Question 8, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the use of artificial intelligence in the composition of judicial judgments.
Minister.
The Scottish Government does not consider it appropriate to comment on the judiciary's use of artificial intelligence. This is because the judiciary is independent of the Scottish Government in order to preserve the independence of the legal system and to protect it from political interference. Legislation places a duty on all government ministers, law officers and members of the Parliament to uphold judicial independence, barring them from trying to exert influence over judicial decisions. Decisions about judicial processes, including whether to use AI in composing judgments, are solely for the judiciary to determine. As head of the judiciary, the Lord President is responsible for making and maintaining appropriate arrangements for the training and guidance of Scottish judicial office holders.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Minister for her response, but I'm really quite astonished that Scottish ministers don't regard it as a serious matter that artificial intelligence could be used to compile judgments in our courts. The publication of the recent tribunal judgment in the case of Sandy Peggy against NHS Fife raised really serious concerns, given the number of manifest errors in it and the number of unprecedented corrections that had to be made. And this led to suspicions that artificial intelligence was used to produce that judgment. Shouldn't the Scottish Government be speaking urgently to the Lord President about these matters to ensure the maintenance of public confidence in our judicial system?
Thank you. I'm sure as the member is aware, the Judiciary and Courts Scotland Act 2008 guarantees judicial independence and established the Lord President as the head of the Scottish judiciary, responsible for the efficient disposal of business in the Scottish courts. Whilst the Scottish Government supports the ethical and responsible use of AI in public services, it has no role in judicial decision-making and cannot intervene in matters that fall within the remit of courts and judiciary.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Justice and Home Affairs. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, in replying to questions about the Independent Advisor's report, which concluded that the Justice Secretary had breached the Ministerial Code on 2 occasions, Angela Constance was unable to answer a question I put to her, and a second question she refused to engage in at all. Following that session, I emailed the Cabinet Secretary at 16:52, and this was read at 16:53. The email asked for answers to the same questions I had asked and not received answers to in the Chamber. So far, almost 24 hours later, I have received no response from the Justice Secretary. So can I ask what requirement or expectation there is for ministers to promptly respond to questions that they were unable to answer in the Chamber? And on a related point, yesterday I outlined what seemed to be a case of party political sources briefing newspapers of the outcome of the Independent Advisor's report before it had been shared with MSPs and this Parliament. So can I ask you if the First Minister or any member of the Scottish Government has indicated to the presiding officer that a leak inquiry is now underway? And if it is not, what action can the presiding officer or this Parliament take to ensure that a leak inquiry is undertaken?
I thank Douglas Ross for the advance notice of his point of order. In relation to the first part of the point of order he raises, he'll be aware that under standing order it's only a requirement for the Scottish Government to respond to lodged questions that were not taken in the Chamber. But as a matter of courtesy and respect, where a minister is unable to provide information in response to a question, I think the expectation would be that they provide that information at the earliest opportunity. In relation to the second part of the point of order he raises, I'm not aware of the particular briefing that he refers to. I'm similarly not aware of any leak inquiry, and any leak inquiry of the type that he refers to would be a matter for the First Minister in the first instance. With that, there will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business, so that front benches can change.